Hi, my name is Terry J. Amon, and welcome to this, my 20th episode of VideoFuzzy. In this installment, I lay in a bit of backstory on this project along with a progress report. I unearth some campy cinema in my classic collection, cross a milestone and bid farewell to a late-night institution in my current collection, and in what I've been watching, I cleared out my DVR again and then some. Plus, 20 episodes into this thing, what the heck is a VideoFuzzy? Stay tuned, we can find out together. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy here.
Before I get into my Friday night feature, I'd like to clear up a couple of misstatements I've noticed in reviewing past episodes. Correction. Error. First and foremost, in episode 19, I celebrated breaking into my third of 12 DVD binders. I do have 12 DVD binders on my shelf, but that means there's always one open on the small table for cataloging for a total of 13 DVD binders. So, along with the two smaller ones I'm filling with my current collection, that's 15 altogether. Also, I kept noticing things about my Friday night feature on Donnie Darko. First, he saved Grandma Death from a hit and run, not a car crash. And holy misstatements, Batman. Yes, airplanes to the side for the moment. Tornadoes are not a stable phenomena in this or any reality, and at no point did I mean to categorize them as a, quote, reliable means of getting from place to place. Except, perhaps, for Oz. When I wrote that, I meant airplanes and tornadoes are both temporally stable phenomena, that is, tornadoes are atmospheric disruptions, not Einstein-Rosen wormholes, and, to the best of my knowledge, nothing carried off by a tornado has reappeared 28 days in the past. And while I'm on the topic of squinting modifiers, in episode 11, my comments on 9JKL, where I said everyone in the neighborhood tuned into his show to tell him that it sucked, probably because his mother told them to, I keep meaning to point out that I meant Judith asked everyone in the neighborhood to tune in and watch her son in his big network premiere of Blind Cop, not to tell them this show was terrible. Pretty much everyone he encountered while out and about came to that conclusion on their own. Another misstatement arose from my discussion of The Alienist, in which I said the serial killer was becoming more and more brazen with the bodies of his victims, almost willing the police to catch them. I meant to say him, not them. The serial killer had already caught them. They were pretty much beyond catching at that point. And in pronunciation mishaps, I misidentified Sykes' telenovela installment as Lights, Camera, Homicidio. Now, high school Spanish class may well have been more than 30 years ago, but the H in homicidio is still quite silent. Lo siento, señorita Holter. And now, onto my Friday night feature.
Friday night feature.
In 2005, a wildly subversive reimagination of Battlestar Galactica aired on Sci-Fi, complete with palace intrigue, espionage, exile, mistrust, personality conflicts, and peril on all sides, set on board a fleet of ships searching for a new home. Heading into, I believe it must have been the show's 4th season, based on its placement in this collection, Sci-Fi aired a marathon of the first 3 seasons, and, to the extent I was able to, I archived them in my collection. This week, the second episode in the series, titled Water, surfaced in my cataloging effort, and until the final scene, I hadn't twigged just how diabolical the show really was. The Galactica fleet is on the run since the Cylons detonated nukes on the homeworld of Caprica. Edward James Olmos as Bill Adama helms the fleet, and as of episode 2, he is developing a nascent, courteous friendship with Mary McDonnell as President Laura Roslin. This tentative gentility is aided by advice from Adama's son, Lee, Apollo, played by Jamie Bamber, who President Roslin conscripts as her military liaison. Adama's second-in-command, Commander Tai, is already rationing his alcohol. In the wake of espionage fears, Baltar Gaius, played by James Callis, is tasked with developing a means of detecting Cylons, since this new version mimics humanity down to the cellular level. He's a bit distracted by Cylon only he can see number 6, played by Trisha Helfer, responsible for the attack on Caprica via, oh, hey, the treasonous Baltar Gaius. Don't worry about it, you merely destroyed our homeworld and gotten us all killed for a bit of fun. Doing a great job, man. As the episode opens, Boomer, a Series 8 model Cylon played by Grace Park, no real spoiler, she's sort of unmasked in the opening credits, comes to dripping wet in a storage locker. She has no memory of what she's doing, why she's wet, or how she got there, and on top of everything else, she has lost some time she can't account for. But she discovers she's carrying C4 explosive and a detonator. She removes the detonator and takes it back to the munitions locker, where she discovers half a dozen other detonators are missing. Horrified, she tracks down Chief Petty Officer Galen Tyrrell, played by Aaron Douglas, and I'll say here it's worth tracking down his acting profiles on imdb.com and tv.com. Either he is possessed of boss-level self-deprecation, or whoever did write them was pranking him somewhat. Galen assures her it's going to be fine. They'll find the detonators. Clearly she was drugged and someone's trying to set her up. Moments later, no need to search, there's a huge kaboom explosion. Galactica's water tanks have been breached and are venting 60% of the fleet's water resources into open space. Well, that settled that, then. There was one more detonator to find, on Boomer herself, which she carries on a Raptor expedition to search for water. The other survey teams come back empty, and her search seems like it's going to turn up nothing as well. That is, her co-pilot isn't finding any water. She is, but she's reporting that she is not, and seems ready to detonate the explosive and kill them both. But she appears to think better of this plan. She suggests they do one more sweep, in which this time, yay, she's found water, and the fleet is saved. She leaves the explosive behind in her Raptor for Galen to find. Galen turns it into the munitions master, saying he found it during an earlier sweep, and assuring her now the whole investigation can wrap up with no suspicion attaching to her whatsoever. This struck me as being brilliant. For the moment, Boomer is trapped on Cylon-occupied Caprica, so the number 8 on Galactica is the only Boomer anyone knows about. Whether she has any memory of the fact that she was dripping wet and the bombs went off in the water tanks and the missing time she's experiencing kind of points to her as being the one who set them, which in fact she was. And when she nearly set off the last one on a scouting mission, but rather held back and discovered water, rather than covert Cylon saboteur, she's now become the hero who saved the day. Right up until they discover the other 8 on the surface of Caprica, and she's got to explain away any number of Orphan Black Sister clones. Or until the otherwise brilliant but compromised Gaius figures out how to tell a Cylon from a human, though their glowing spines during the act of lovemaking point to some LED micro-installation that at the very least would make it difficult to get through security, but oh well. It was fun to kick back and watch this episode from a series that did some truly phenomenal storytelling. It included some shifted perspective wherein our heroes were responsible for perpetrating terrorist-style attacks against the Cylons and examining those motivations from a sympathetic point of view. From this episode, I'm enjoying the message that leadership can be principled and that treasonous actions can and will be rooted out and exposed, however long justice might be delayed. And, yep, I think Mary McDonnell presented an outstanding president. Laura Roslin is one of my all-time favorite characters, and I enjoyed her development over the course of this series. In terms of my collection, it looks like I've archived several episodes from Season 3. Apart from the Battlestar Galactica Razor prequel special, thus far this was the first one I've found from Season 1. Looking forward to seeing more as they track into view.
Diving into the classic collection.
In my classic collection, as I mentioned in episode 19, I encountered the first 40 minutes or so of John Waters' wackadoo social treatise, Female Trouble, in which we learned Baltimore was the capital of the U.S. for a couple of months once, and we meet Divine as failing high school burnout Dawn Davenport. This past week, I was able to watch the rest of it. Outraged when her parents refuse to buy her cha-cha heels, Dawn runs away and encounters Earl Peterson while hitchhiking. He gets her pregnant with Taffy in a boisterous round of lovemaking and refuses to pay child support. So, Dawn commits to a life of crime, dramatic, ridiculous crimes which catch the attention of the Dashers, a couple of beauty shop weirdos who perpetuate the Manson family notion that crime is beauty. They get Dawn hooked on a drug called liquid eyeliner and encourage her to commit more outrageous and psychedelic crimes, which include the attempted murder of her terrible daughter, who herself runs away from home and murders her father during a rape attempt, and abduction and mutilation of Ida, her terrible ex-auntie-in-law, who threw acid in her face and scarred her for life, blaming Dawn for her nephew's desertion of her following their divorce. The Dashers just convince Dawn that she's all the more beautiful now, and arrange a gigantic stage production for her. In the meantime, Taffy makes good on her threat to become a Hare Krishna, and Dawn makes good on her threat to murder her for it on the night of her big exhibition debut, where she bounces on a trampoline for a while and fires a handgun into her audience. She's tried and sentenced to death, but has trouble focusing because she's just so famous now. What a great film! And hey, this was interesting. Anyone who's ever encountered the phrase, "go F yourself," leave it to Divine to find a way. While in his secondary role of junkyard pervert Earl Peterson, Divine quite pornographically bedded Elizabeth Taylor lookalike Sally Turner as, ta-da, Dawn Davenport. Well, that is if you can call it bedded if it takes place on a discarded mattress along the side of the road. Anyway, it kind of makes sense that John Waters' film staple Minx Stole would be the product of that particular union. In other camp, I see where I've saved the... Seriously? Blake Edwards really had nothing to do with this? The thing had 5 or 6 directors and he wasn't any of them. Wild. And the also not Mel Brooks production of the 1967's swinging 60s Ian Fleming Bond spoof Casino Royale, in which everyone is James Bond so as to confuse Smirsh and maybe the audience, while Woody Allen runs around as both a Bond and a Bond villain. Wacky! I can promise you Daniel Craig's 2006 production is much more worthwhile, but I will note here that no one in that production delivered anything like this exchange between Woody Allen as Jimmy Bond and Dahlia Lavi as the detainer who, naked and bound to a table, exclaims, "You're crazy! You're absolutely crazy!" Jimmy responds, "They called Einstein crazy." Confused, she retorts, "That's not true. No one ever called Einstein crazy." To which Jimmy replies, "Well, they would have if he had carried on like this." I did enjoy that. Oh, and here's another callback. According to Wikipedia, this film accounted for the scene in The Life and Death of Peter Sellers where the lifelong comic actor had legitimately hoped to be the next James Bond for realsies and was trying to play it straight, while everyone else was pretty much playing it for laughs. This movie by committee was directed piecemeal and cobbled together like Frankenstein's monster. Wikipedia has Sellers at odds with Orson Welles, walking off the set or being simply unavailable to shoot scenes that would otherwise have contributed to continuity. Not that continuity seemed to be such a top priority for this film. In the end, it ended with everyone blown up in an explosion set off by Woody Allen and partying in heaven. Well, most of them anyway, and camp animated calligraphy. Otherwise, my classic collection is feeding back into series recordings, episodes from the first season of Eli Stone, which it broke my heart a little bit to see the late George Michael again alive and singing. Also, I had to double-check that Eli's assistant, Patty Delacroix, played by Loretta Devine, was not the same actress, Sherry Shepard, who played Nicholas D'Agosto's assistant Anne Flatch in Trial and Error. She's not, of course, different other actress, but wow, their voices are similar, and I was a little embarrassed by my confusion because chronologically Ms. Shepard is nearly 2 decades Ms. Devine's junior, but in my defense, because of the timey-wimey nature of DVD archives, Ms. Devine was 58 on Eli Stone and Ms. Shepard was 50 for Trial and Error, so they weren't quite as far apart in age on my screen as all that. And the 4th season of Lost, which, had the show itself not been confusing enough, seems to have fed into my collection in a slightly jumbled order, but I was able to figure out which episodes were which easily enough. Part 2 of Mr. Monk is on the Run, the 6th season finale, aired on USA, and that was hilarious, especially when Police Lieutenant Randy Disher, under the mistaken impression that private investigator Adrian Monk was dead, composed a 14-verse semi-controversial but fully annoying song to honor his memory. For a short while, CBS was airing heavily edited episodes of Michael C. Hall's crime drama Dexter, and I seem to have caught some of them. That's a dark, twisty show about psychopathic Florida serial killer Dexter Morgan targeting murderers as a pastime and blood spatter analysis by profession, but well-developed and tracks through some truly compelling storytelling and character development. His interaction with Jennifer Carpenter as his sister Deborah Morgan is well drawn, and it's fun to see Julie Benz as love interest Rita Bennett in here as well. Finally, over on BBC America, I grabbed a very cool Season 2 episode of Torchwood called Adam, centered on memory manipulation, as well as one of the worst go-nowhere Dalek installments I've ever encountered on Doctor Who, a third-season David Tennant offering in which the Daleks develop a human-Dalek hybrid with pig people in the basement of a theater. Not their finest hour, not by a long stretch. Between this one and the Season 7 installment with Matt Smith and the Weeping Angels in The Angels Take Manhattan, it's hard to pick which is worse. Probably The God Complex, or The Curse of the Black Spot, or Sleep No More, or Fear Her. There's actually quite a few that are just as bad, so they can all be an equal amount of disappointing.
Current collection.
In my current collection, I saw where I was recording entire episodes of the Chris Hardwick Internet Roundup at midnight when I realized why. I archived the 4 from the final week of the show, which some clever person organized to feature nearly all of the favorite guests from the run of the show, including At Midnight Royalty Ron Funches, the Sklar Brothers, Mary Lynn Roshkub, 3 sketch comedians from The Kids in the Hall, Grace Helbig, Steve Agee, Nikki Glazer, Brian Posehn, Natasha Legaro, Dan Harmon, Chris D'Elia, Whitney Cummings, Doug Benson, Flula Borg, Paul F. Tompkins. The final episode just kept a constant circulation of guests at the podiums. Even Chris Hardwick himself, decked out in a tuxedo for his final episode, got to play a few of his silly games. And all the while, I just could not believe this show was ending. Along with the soup, these shows really boiled down some of the ridiculousness in the world of media around us into manageable bites that I could watch and enjoy and then not have to track them all down elsewhere myself or look at everyone else's viral offerings on Facebook. It can't honestly have cost anything at all to produce this show, so it's kind of shocking that after only 4 seasons of straight-up goofball internet comedy, we had to say goodbye. Otherwise, I encountered a few cool series I remember watching as I'd brought them in. The USA production of The Sinner, the series finale of Claws, or as close as I got. I'm depending on TNT rerunning the final episode before the show returns this summer because I was having cable issues when it aired the first time, and even my on-demand listing wouldn't show me the final episode of Season 1, titled Bat Crap. My collection of this series ends at Ambrosia, which was a high-tension thrill ride building to a powerful chase sequence, but no, I definitely need some resolution on that series. I did manage to close out the first season of Preacher, which was pretty dark, hit that 100-disc milestone in my current direct-to-DVD collection. Oh, and then the first episode of Preacher Season 2 showed up on that disc I needed to transfer and rebuild, disc X101. I brought that in as I reported in episode 8, along with what looks like a 20-minute portion I was able to archive of the Nova episode Clips Over America, followed up by a bit of Unplanned Parenthood, the Season 6 Integrity episode of Modern Family, in which Jay and Phil pick up a castle for Joe's party, Mitch and Cam discuss adopting another child, Claire tries to bribe Luke's principal into giving him an award, and Gloria teaches us the definition of a Colombian hothead. Fun.
What I've been watching.
And oh, wow, have I been watching a lot these past couple of weeks, especially last weekend when Ralph was out of town visiting friends. I had the DVR running almost constantly and watched hours and hours of programming. Well, watched might be overstating it. I did watch quite a lot, but there were also a few shows I just pulled aside for some other time. For one thing, I set the State of the Union address to archive while I went for a walk. By that point, I'd pretty much gotten the highlights, and even CNN wasn't going to interrupt the thing for commercials. I did enjoy the Democratic response once I got back, but I agree with others that young Kennedy has sought to do something about how watery his mouth gets. Whatever the merits of the thoughts and ideas he's expressing, presentation absolutely has an impact. I don't think I'll record CNN's version in the future. The commentators before and after each speech were clearly booked to score the sharpest, zingiest, most bombastic points they could, rather than to provide actual analysis, which there's a limit to how much you can actually provide when there's a panel of half a dozen people all chomping at the bit to say how dumb everyone else's view is, and you want to make the hardest spin for your point of view. It ends up sounding like a bunch of squabbling children, and, frankly, what was I expecting? Movies I pulled in included Anchorman 2, The Legend Continues, where I enjoyed title character Will Ferrell's run-in with a shark, Interstellar, which sounded like a fascinating exploration for some other time, Zero Dark 30, Marvel's Fantastic Four, The Martian, Thor, The Dark World, Maze Runner, The Scorched Trials, Batman, Dark Knight Rises, and Psych, the movie. This last one confused me a bit, because ever since Facebook began telling me we were going to get a Psych movie, I expected it was going to be on the big screen. Oh, no, sweet innocent Terry. We will not be putting Sean and Gus and their ridiculous lives on the big screen. I kept watching for it to open, and it was actually running on USA. Fortunately, it was also still running on USA On Demand, so I pulled that up and pressed play. Sean, for the past 3 years, has been avoiding popping the question to Juliet because he's looking for his engagement ring that got stolen, and which he turns up while wearing a wacky disguise. The jewel thief threatens to kill him, but he tells him his fortune, which all comes true. Mainly because Sean sent Officer, well, I suppose now Detective Buzz to follow him around, himself in a series of wacky disguises to craft scenarios in which the events Sean foretold came true. Between then and that, there was an hour or so of caper to resolve, with a serial killer from Juliet's past having teamed up with a sort of wacky, I want to say British-type scoundrel, and Juliet re-examines her bona fides as a police officer. She ultimately determines that she's good enough, smart enough, and doggone it, people like her. In helping her out with these determinations, Sean encounters and misunderstands the word dongle, and tells best friend and partner not to be the comma in Earth, Wind, and Fire. For his part, Gus introduces Sean as white privilege, and visits a planetarium where he meets up with a woman who is a little obsessive, but is probably perfect for him. There's clues to track down, a kidnapping to thwart, and in the end, teamwork saves the day, and oh yeah, you're not going to believe this, but the jewel thief from the opening scene is actually an ordained minister. Now reunited with the perfect ring, Sean proposes to Juliet in the midst of all their friends and co-workers, and they have an instant wedding, complete with a random bouquet. Happy ending! Well, in the closing moments, John Cena shows up in a cameo to reprise his role as Juliet's brother and lays in the potential for a high-energy sequel. But for this movie, for this adventure, everything was pretty well wrapped up and quite enjoyable. In episodes I was watching, I feel that while uneven, the reboot of The X-Files has mostly been enjoyable and has provided some decent commentary in our reality-fluid times. Scully's son, William, missing from the season premiere, reappears as part of a storyline where he can project an image into the mind of whoever he's talking to, which is a pretty good means of disguise. In other storylines, Skinner's past service in Vietnam and exposure to psychotropic chemicals catches up to him, and in other adventures, Scully and Mulder investigate the nature of manipulated reality and the potential for parallel universes. It sure picked up from the first one I watched, and I'll be interested in seeing where they go from here, especially if they try tying these all together. And my Season 12 Supernatural DVDs arrived. And busy as I've been, I've only been able to watch a few episodes so far, but I thought the season got off to a strong start, with the British Men of Letters operation finally showing up to address what these upstart American hunters have gotten up to over the past 4 seasons. Really, it's kind of astonishing that with the key to Oz on the premises and all of the other resources just shuttered and abandoned for decades, that it took them this long to come over here and strip it down, or to at least address what Sam and Dean had gotten up to in the intervening years they'd reactivated it. I mean, surely they had the phone number. More exciting, of course, was the darkness reuniting Sam and Dean with their mom. Mary Winchester, played by Samantha Smith, is resurrected and from the get-go throws in with Sam and Dean on fighting and hunting. Of course, her frame of reference ends in the 1970s, so there's stuff they need to bring her up to speed, but she quickly gets the hang of it, and by the end of the 3rd episode, she leaves? Well, I suspect she'll be back, but as she points out, she missed quite a lot with her boys all grown up now, and she needs a bit of time to process. So many shows, so much commentary. I just wanted to mention the season finale of Happy on Sci-Fi, That was a wild ride. When the truckload of abducted children was intercepted outside the warehouse and Haley went missing, I was sure she'd been captured by Sunny Shine. As it turns out, she was taken by her original captor, Very Bad Santa, who took her back to his warehouse and planned to... Here's the thing. I was completely not ready for this, which is part of the genius of this storyline. Rather than the already grotesque potential for sexual assault, which was disgusting but something we viewers had been steeling ourselves the entire season. When children are abducted and sold, it's probably going to be sex slavery. But no. Very Bad Santa was going to take a cordless drill and lobotomize her, like he'd done with his other shambling zombie toys. Well, this level of violation was not expected and put my adrenaline into high gear, willing Nick Sachs to save her, which he, thank God, was able to. But wow, was that intense. I don't know who wrote this, but that was some incredible storytelling and seriously balls-out production. They left things in a good place to either be a one-off or return for a second season, and either way, I just want to appreciate when storytelling is capable of surprise. That is first rate. Very quickly, before getting into the numbers, I needed to react to something I noticed in TNT's presentation of The Alienist, and that is, I know this is an incredibly dark and edgy presentation, a very dark and edgy story, but I've hoped they've put enough safeguards in place to protect the young actors in the scenes where they're presented as child prostitutes dressed as girls. I was thinking about this in the context of the productions of TNT's Will that have been cycling back into my current collection, and the young man, Billy Cooper, I think it was, played by George Sear. Sorry for any mistaken identities. Honestly, the internet has been about zero help with this. Another situation where a young boy was dressed as a girl and pressed into service as a prostitute. In his scenes, he tended to overpower his would-be clients and steal their money and run away, thus retaining some of the power in that particular exchange. In The Alienist, the boys are shown in the main reception area of Paresis Hall dressed as girls and, well, plying their trade, which shifts a bit further into darker spaces than I'm entirely comfortable viewing. Naturally, the situation is meant to be entirely unacceptable to anyone, and when John is attacked in the course of his investigation, it becomes as explicit as television production can make it that this is just generally a crime scene. But there's lingering camera lenses, softened lighting, one situation where a boy is seen making what will be his final seduction before he becomes the serial killer's latest victim that makes me think this series might be a favorite for, say, Mr. Herbert on The Family Guy. The book this show is based on is a dark one, and the production decisions they've made have got to be their own, and of course, part of the impact of that story is how revolting the crimes portrayed actually are. But wild as the one-upsmanship sometimes gets in the television dramatic landscape, guys, find a floor that keeps us out of actual exploitation, please. Thank you. Crunching some numbers. By the numbers, since I checked in last October, I have cataloged a whopping 92 discs in my classic collection, representing more than 180 hours of media, taking me up to my 431st disc in my classic collection. Also, since my last check-in, I've cataloged 59 discs in my current collection, representing more than 350 hours of media. This has broken a minor milestone of passing, as I mentioned, my 100th disc in my current collection, bringing me to recovered disc X101. So, I'm about 17% of my way through the 2,570 discs I have in my classic collection, and about 74% of the way through the 136 discs I have in my current collection. I figured 20 episodes into this project, it's time to talk about it a little bit. I gave a bit of a thumbnail in episode 1 about what I thought it was about at the time, that is, cataloging a collection of 2,500 plus VHS transfers to DVD and what I'm finding on these things. But I think that over the past 8 months, this project has taken shape and progressed beyond what I could have anticipated. Honestly, I think it's just getting better. First off, in terms of actual linear progress, tracking this cataloging project into my third binder feels like more of an accomplishment, more emotionally, than I can express. I worked through cataloging my first binder while I continued to fill up new ones, progress that was hard to measure since my appetite for media was voracious. As any one tape was digitized, and for quite a lot of this project across 3 discs, another was filled, adding to what was becoming a horde of tapes, veritable walls of VHS tapes that threatened to close me in. Even reusing tapes upon digitizing them only slowed the rate at which I purchased blank tapes and filled them up. I never had an accurate count of these things, but once digitized they filled nearly 2,600 discs, quite a few at 2 hours each, but oh, so many at 6 hours too. So however many tapes I had at any one time, there were a lot. And to this moment, sitting here talking to you, I can't tell you what led to this obsession. Everything starts somewhere, and my very first tape was actually one of the last ones I transferred. In the late 1980s, MTV was running episodes of Monty Python's Flying Circus at 10 p.m., and I was determined to record them. There was a VCR at the Honors House at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, and that was a program a lot of us liked. I only had one tape, and I recorded over it again and again with Monty Python episodes and other stuff that caught my attention. It eventually occurred to me to purchase another tape, and by then that first tape had gotten pretty well beaten up, but that tape marks the beginning of what has become a lifelong passion for archiving, and despite its relative significance, I can't tell you where it ended up in my collection. Kind of the nature of this entire project, honestly. It wasn't by design. As with most of these things, that tape just got transferred in the order it came to hand, in and among the final box of tapes that I was finally able to transfer last spring. It's just, regardless of how much Python I've got in this collection, and I know I've got quite a lot, it will be pretty clear to me which disc that is, and once I get to it, I will very much love reconnecting with that material. And even with the sheer volume of the project ahead, the fact that my whole collection of transfers does in fact fit in a small cabinet represents a massive improvement in my media hoarding situation. The fact that I've managed to catalog more than 300 discs in less than a year, and more than 500 altogether, suggests that progress is happening. 20 episodes in, I still have a good long ways to go, but I'm not just spinning my wheels here, and before too long I should be able to lay my hands to any scrap of media in my personal media archive I might be searching for. Finally, a note on the title, which I enjoy, but is probably a bit obscure. It calls to mind suggestions of fuzzy videos, which, despite most of them being transferred from VHS tapes over the course of many decades, is generally not the case. It's not HD as a rule, but I have no trouble with the image quality. Rather, this podcast primarily explores my media archive, their videos, and I'm Fuzzy, a big, warm, furry cuddle bear of a guy, so after clicking around to make sure I wasn't infringing on anyone else's name, I settled on calling it VideoFuzzy, where I'm forever sifting my basket of media memories. And with that, thank you for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at videofuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and videofuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook. For VideoFuzzy, I'm Terry J. Amon. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.